taking chances. I feel a lot like 17. I feel like windows roll down new city streets and paths. I feel like anything can happen, laughing. You take me right back to we were young. And thought I feel like this, like when I close my eyes and don't even care if anyone sees me. It's like I can't fly and don't even think touches the ground. Like a heartbeat skips like an open grave, like a one-way trip for an aeroplane. It's the way that I feel now with you, brand new. I feel like a young drunk hillside, not making big mistakes. I feel like for the first time in a long time, I am not afraid. I feel like a kid. Never thought it feels like this. Like when I close my eyes, don't even care if anyone sees me. It's like I can't hide, and you don't even think touches the ground. Like a heartbeat skips like an open page, like a one-way trip for an aeroplane. It's the way that I feel now with you, brand new. Like when I close my eyes and don't even care if anyone sees me. It's like I can't fly and you don't even think touching the ground. Like a heartbeat skips like an open page, like a one-way trip for an aeroplane. It's the way that I feel now with you, brand new.
Debbie, will you come be my assistant? I warned her ahead of time that she might have to be my assistant today. I figured having the video first would help give maybe some context to what I'll be sharing about today, and that maybe you can kind of envision it in your head. So I have some random photos that we'll just scroll through, and there's no specific order to them, and so I may go off on tangents as a result. But as you can tell, I had the wonderful opportunity to go to Istanbul, and if I'm honest, before going, I knew nothing about it. I couldn't find it on a map. I didn't know anything about the culture, didn't know what language they spoke in Turkey. I knew nothing. And some of that came from last minute change of plans and going to a new location, so I didn't have time to do a lot of research before I went. I ended up having to guess, a 2-week notice of, hey, you're going to a new location, here you go. And so 2 weeks isn't a lot of time to change what you're packing, pack for a whole new environment, and then take off. And so Istanbul is a city of about, depending on your resource, 16 to 18 million people in this one city. And so it's broken down into 39 different districts. And the district I lived in had about 500,000 people living in a 4x4 square mile radius. And so this is a neighborhood not far from where I live. You can just kind of scroll through. And so as you can tell, everybody lives right on top of each other. It's just amazing how many people they can fit into such a small location. But yet at the same time, you don't feel crowded, you don't feel overwhelmed. And there is a hustle and bustle to the city, but yet as many different cultures in America, people just take their time. So even though it is a fast-paced culture, it is also a culture where people will tell you they're on their way, and then 2 hours later they'll show up. And whether that's a result of traffic, it could be. It is a city that runs on public transportation. And so as you can see with some of the water, Istanbul is on it's on Europe and Asia. And so you do have to travel across the Bosphorus Strait. So ferries is a part of the transportation, subways that go under the water, buses, taxis, any kind of public transportation you can think of, they probably have it. And so I quickly learned how to become, I wouldn't say good at public transportation, but learning how to get around. Thankfully, they have apps nowadays that can help you map your way around. Will you go back one photo? This photo is actually taken from a building that's in my neighborhood, or I guess it's the neighborhood over. And so this is an overview look of right where I lived, in the middle of all these people, all these houses. And it's amazing that even though you're just one tiny apartment in the midst of a sea of apartments and housing, you still start to become familiar with your environment and familiar with the people, and you do see the same faces. And I'll get to that part a little later on, but so just a little bit about Istanbul. Istanbul is very ethnically diverse. Like I said, I didn't know anything about this area before I arrived, and so I have since learned it is a huge tourist destination. The neighborhood I lived in, of course, was not a tourist destination, but Istanbul is where a lot of people from all around the world will come. But specifically also just to live there, they have at least people from every Central Asian country are living in Turkey. So it's very diverse. People from all over the world are living there and creating their own little communities and cultures. It's very financially diverse. So as you can see, you've got normal housing, but then if you travel over there, which this area, I'm assuming that's, actually I'm not going to pretend I know where that is, because I might be wrong, but there's an area not far from where I lived. It was about a 10-15 minute walk, depending on how fast you're in a hurry to get there, and it was called Levant. And it's high in money. And if you cross the road from over there, you've got houses that are probably, in our currency, $1 million houses with people who have nice cars, nice jobs. But the area I lived in was lower on the economic totem pole, where you have multiple people living in one house, all trying to financially help out so that they can live and afford rent. And so I lived more in a poorer area. And then if you keep walking farther down the street from where I lived, it just became a little more poor and a little less off. So it's very economically diverse. Not far from where I live, they also filmed movies. Turkish movies are very popular, and so they did a lot of filming near there. And so it was just very fascinating that in the same day, you could cross paths with people who have high-end jobs, people that have low-income jobs who are barely making it by. You can cross paths with tourists, college students, smaller children, older people. It's just very diverse across the board. Like I said, they are dominated by public transportation. That's a huge way of getting around, and I'm extremely grateful I did not have to drive, because one, it's a ton of people, and like there's a way of driving there that just makes sense to them, but it just doesn't make sense to a lot of other people. It was the most chaotic yet organized driving I've ever seen. But the main reason I'm glad I could never drive there is because parallel parking is the way of life. And not parallel park. I've never had to really parallel park in my life. But it is an amazing craft there. They have it down to a T. And people are helpful, and they'll come out and they'll help you and give you directions on how to do it. But thankfully, I never had to try. One of the things about Istanbul that's interesting is that it is a very old town. And for history buffs, I am not a history person. So please, afterwards, when I give an opportunity for questions, don't ask any history questions because I won't have any answers for you. But Istanbul, Constantinople, I mean, a long part of history there. And so there is a part, you can go on, Mom. There is a part of town where it's the original part. So it's very, very old, and that's where it started in a way. And so you have this old tradition of the city, and you still have old tradition within the people and the older generations, but yet that's being, I wouldn't say changed and gentrified, not gentrification by any means, but it is happening. You know, a newness is coming in, just like life happens, where cities grow, they develop, and they change. So there is that clash at times of difference of cultures, where you have your older generation who are still holding on to the older views and beliefs, and then you still have the younger generation who's being impacted by the ways of society and the ways of dress and just changing. So that was an interesting, I guess, a clash at times that you would see. And yeah, it is, you know, I wouldn't say it's a clash, but it was definitely a balance of tradition and conservatism versus culture, Hollywood. So my neighborhood, just to give a little information about it, like I said, it was more on the lower economic end. I lived in a building with 2 other teammates and all our Turkish neighbors. And so our neighborhood was definitely calmer. You could walk down the street. Grocery stores are everywhere, which is amazing. One, you don't have a car, so you carry everything. So you begin to change the way you shop. And you begin to go, oh, okay, I just need to shop for what I need right now, or at least to get me through the next couple of days. So they have businesses all along the streets, restaurants. You can go there to find all your basic needs, plumbers, handymen, they're all right there in your neighborhood. And I wouldn't say that people don't leave their neighborhoods, but you don't really have to. The districts have multiple neighborhoods within. So see your parallel parking in action? I could never, so I just stuck to public transportation. I lived in a more conservative neighborhood, and as far as Islam goes, and so we were a little more cautious with what we would wear, making sure that we fit in and we were not breaking any of their cultural rules as well as their moral rules. One of our goals in being there is that we want to be approachable. Coming in as a foreigner, one, that already is a little odd, because foreigners don't normally come to live in certain neighborhoods. So we were living in a very, I'm not really sure the best term to use, but I mean, people had lived there forever. That was where generations had lived in this one neighborhood. And so here we come. And so we did our best to abide by the law of the land, the way that the people were accustomed to and used to. And so my neighborhood had a really homey feel to it, even though it's like I said, it's a large area. You get to recognize the same people as you're walking down the street, as you're going to the grocery stores, the restaurants. You begin to develop relationships and see some of the same people. Religion, so Turkey is an Islamic country, which is fascinating because if you go back through the history, there is so much rich Christian cultural heritage within Turkey. And some of the photos that you had seen in the video was from Ephesus, Cappadocia, places like the Bible is so rich there, of rich history. The 7 churches are there in Turkey, and it's just amazing that a lot of Paul's work was done there. And Christianity did, I don't want to say reign at one point, but it was prominent at one point. And so now Islam is the religion of the country. And so some of the things, I just want to share some of what I learned, because you can read a lot about Islam and you can read stories, but it's different when you actually get there and you start to learn from the people themselves. And so just some of the things that I did learn, within Islam, you know, they are believers of Allah, they are believers of Muhammad, that he was the prophet, and they do have a salvation viewpoint, but it does not operate like ours. They operate very much off of a point-based system. So all of their life, as they follow, as they are Muslims and they follow through Islam, their goal is to earn enough points to where that when they die, hopefully they had enough good points and that they found favor in Allah's eyes, and so then they can have salvation and eternal rest. And that looks a lot differently than what we think salvation looks like. And so it was really interesting, though, to watch how they would go about living in order to earn those points. And so two of the main things that really stood out to me, and when you live in a culture where you are the minority as far as your beliefs go, it really hits you differently, and it really is shocking because me and my roommates, my teammates also lived in our same, kind of in our same district as well. And so really out of my neighborhood, out of our district, out of the 500,000 people, more than likely we were the only believers in that area. And so you can just imagine the darkness that you feel, the isolation that you feel, knowing that you believe and practice something that no one else really does, that you can't really have that relation. And that was probably the first time in my life that I'd really been in an environment for such a long period of time. I was there for 17 months. And so that's quite a long time to feel a little isolated than you do when you're in America and it's just so familiar and there are churches and you find a lot more people that believe the same thing. And so two of the things that really stood out to me as far as their Islam beliefs and I guess holidays, they have Ramadan, which is where they go through their 30 days of fasting. And that was quite an experience because people change their routine. So from sun up to sundown, they don't eat anything. I think they drink water, but other than that, like nothing. And so it's a very interesting because it changes their attitudes, it changes their behaviors. They become a little more grouchy later in the day, which I would too, a little more hangry. And so it was interesting. You also can't hang out with your friends as much because usually in this culture, you're going out for coffee, you're going out for tea, you're going out for breakfast. But when they're fasting, they're trying not to be put in any circumstance where they might be tempted. And so you don't see your friends a lot during that 30 days. They stay inside a lot more. They do go to work. But again, restaurants will sometimes close down during that time, at least during certain portions, as to not be a temptation. And so they will do all of this, though, knowing or believing that it's earning them points. Because not everybody chooses to fast. Not all. Same thing in America. Not all people who claim to be a believer is a believer. Same thing in Turkey. Not all people who claim to be a Muslim are really Muslim and follow all of those procedures and beliefs. And so it was really sad to not be able to celebrate in that with them because for some of them who were very devout, you saw the joy that it brought them to do something that they felt like they were truly obeying Allah and bringing honor to Him. And so they wanted you to celebrate in that with them, but there was a block because you know, like, you can't do that. So that was really difficult, just to recognize that they really are investing so much of themselves into something that will fail them. And these are just a bunch of different mosques, as I'm sure you picked up on. But I'll get to the mosques in a minute. But so yeah, Ramadan was really beautiful to watch, but also very difficult to watch. Just to see the joy that they got from knowing they were winning, but yet they weren't. Another one that was interesting was that they also do, they have a sacrificial feast that comes not long after Ramadan. And so this is a time, which this is just the irony of how life works. And so the sacrificial feast is based off of the Old Testament when Abraham was sacrificing Isaac. And there are portions of the Bible that they do believe that are in the Quran. They just have a different view or a different meaning attached to that. And so it's so ironic to me that they do celebrate this huge sacrificial feast where they will actually go and purchase goats and cows, like not right around the block from my apartment. There's a car wash that they, not like our car washes, but a car wash that they turn into a slaughterhouse that you can go and purchase your cow or your sheep or your goat, and they'll slaughter it right there, and then you can take it to the butcher and they'll do whatever butchers do, and then you can take your meat. And so that was also interesting because here's this beautiful, beautiful representation of from the Bible, with Abraham sacrificing Isaac and what that meant with God sacrificing Jesus on our behalf. But yet again, there's that disconnect where they see it in such a different light and in such a different view. And so those were two of the point-based systems where they do these things in hopes that it earns them good points. And it's very costly for them to do both of them in multiple ways, whether that's financial or relational. One of my friends, a friend of hers, that she would share the gospel with her, she told her multiple times, you keep telling me about Jesus, but because I am Turkish, I am always going to be a Muslim. And so, I'm not going to say that for all Turkish they believe this, but that put a perspective in my mind that for them to be born Turkish is to be born Muslim. And they believe the same thing is true for Americans. To be born in America, you must be a Christian. Or they just automatically assume you're a Christian because that's kind of the overview. It used to be kind of America was a Christian nation and that's just what you are. And so that really helped me get a different perspective as to how they view Christianity, of how they view conversion and switching from Islam to a different religion, because to them it is inbred in them. That is what they are. They can never change that. Two things I learned that are no-nos in Turkey and also Islamic countries is that, one, evangelism is illegal. And so we went there under the platform of helping with an English center, which is true. We did do that. We did, and I'll get to that. But because of the Crusades that happened centuries ago, it had such a negative impact and negative connotation of what Christians are and what they do. The Crusades were not a beautiful experience of saying, hey, here's the gospel. And so when you come in and you say, oh, hey, we're Christians or we're missionaries, red flags all around and you will not be coming back, and who knows what else could happen. And so no evangelism, they frown upon that. So we never outwardly went out of our way to evangelize like we might here in America. Also, I learned that it's illegal to evangelize to kids under 18, which I thought that was interesting, but I understand the logic behind that. So we were always very quick at our English events when young people would come up, we'd be quick to ask, what's your age, how old are you? Because we wanted to be sure that at any point we never steered towards anything truth-based, for fear that they could go back and tell someone, and then that would be bad for us. And so like I said, there is this change right now between very conservative Muslims and also the younger generation who's kind of pushing back on that. So depending on where you live would kind of determine what type of Muslim you were going to run into. Would it be the more conservatives who have their full burqas on and everything and they're covered head to toe? I saw that quite often, which is a decision, that's a whole other story. You can ask questions later. But even though they are strict followers of Islam, you can pause there. One of the things that I was quite surprised about, when I was going, I was fearful. I don't know, can you talk about God? Can you not talk about God? Can I tell them I'm a Christian? Can I not? Can I take my Bible? Can I not? I had no idea. You hear things in the news and social media and you just don't know. And so I did learn that they are open to religions. Turkey, specifically Turkey, but also Istanbul, they're not afraid of other religions. They're not opposed to other religions. They just don't want you imposing it upon them, not trying to force them to do that. And they like talking about religion. So I was very surprised at how easy and natural it was. Maybe it's just a gift of the Lord, but it was very natural to have gospel conversations. It was very natural to have truth-based conversations. And we would run across certain people who would just ask us questions. Tell me more about your religion. Because they also confuse Christianity, Catholicism, it all runs together. There's no distinction to them. It's all the same. So it gave us a lot of opportunities to say, no, this is, as followers of Jesus, this is kind of what we believe, this is what it looks like. And so I was very surprised at how easy it was to get into the rhythm of sharing truth in the gospel, but yet I was also always surprised at how blind they really are and how deaf their ears are to the truth. And so it felt like no matter how many times we shared different aspects of the gospel or different truth with the same people over and over and over again, you could just tell it wasn't hitting home. There was just no understanding or awareness of their need for the gospel or their need for salvation. Which, when you've lived in a country that's been Islamic for centuries, and that's just what's been bred into you. Like, I get it. There's been a long seed of darkness sown in that country through Islam, and so like I get that it's a large work only the Lord can do. Only He can truly bring about that change. And so, moving on to the ministry aspect, so that's a little bit of the background as far as Istanbul, the religion. So ministry, what does that look like for us coming in under, we're tourists, we're English teachers, we're English helpers, although we never claim to be teachers because we don't have any of that certification, but we did do English conversational practice because I by no means am an English teacher. I learned more about English grammar in Turkey than I did living in America. And so kind of what ministry looked like while we're speaking about church and religion, there are churches there. There are Christian, Baptist isn't a term they use at all, but there are Christian churches that have been started by other workers that are gospel, Bible-believing churches. And so I had the privilege of attending a church that half my team went to one church and then half went to a different church. And so I was very shocked that there were that many, because again, I didn't know, like, do we play underground church where no one knows there are churches there, but like they are there and they are public and they are known about, again, which is fine as long as you're not out trying to do strong evangelism. And so the church that I attended was a Turkish church, and it was made up of a lot of different people, and it was just this beautiful representation of what the body of Christ looks like. There were Iranian people, Turkish people, Koreans, Americans, some Cubans. I mean, it was just this wide variety of people, and it was really beautiful. We did use only Turkish, and so I did take Turkish for a year while I was living there, which was a really special gift to be able to do. And by the end of it, I still spoke like a child, but even children couldn't understand me, which didn't make me feel good. But the adults were really kind and really compassionate and could kind of pick apart what you were trying to say. And so, so even though while we were at church, there's a picture that will come at the very end about the church, but during my first half of the time I was there, it was during COVID. And so I got there September of 2020, right in the middle of COVID kind of happening. And so Turkey was closed down to a lot of different things. They didn't do a lot of social group activities. And so our church met outside in a garden. And so we all social distanced, and we sat with our masks and we sang. And it was a really beautiful experience just to watch them do church. Because like I said earlier, when you live in a city this large, you're isolated because you don't quite believe the same, so you may not have a lot of friends. And for some people, they give up a lot to be a believer. So for the Turkish believers, they've given up a lot. They've given up relationships with family, relationships with coworkers, relationships with a lot of people in order to be a believer. For Iranians, they've had to leave Iran and come. So they've given up a lot too in order to follow Christ. And so when they do gather for church, it's this beautiful celebration that lasts at least 3 hours, because this is the only time during the week they're probably going to interact with other believers. And like I mentioned, Istanbul runs on public transportation, and so people are traveling 45 minutes to an hour to get to church. For some people it was less, for some it was probably more. But talk about, a desire to be in the house of the Lord if you're going to travel an hour. I don't even like traveling very far to go to Walmart. And so I just had such an appreciation of watching them love the Lord in that way, of wanting to be together, of wanting to do community. And so I did adapt to the fact that church wasn't until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So that was a little different, but I'm not mad at it. And so church would last from 1 till about 3, 4 o'clock. And then afterwards, people would hang out and we would do tea and we'd have snacks. Turkey is very much a warm culture, a warm community, very hospitable, so they love spending time together. And so that was really great if you're there to just give your time, which is one of the things I learned, that as you're doing ministry, it just is about time. I mean, it's about a lot more, but at least in Turkey, with my team, there were 4 different families that I got a chance to serve alongside, as well as 2 other single girls that I lived with. And so, like I said, our main platform there was to work at the Dernek, which was our English center. And so some of these youths, because because COVID had kind of closed a lot down, normally we had a building that we would meet in, and before COVID, they do 3 different programs a week where they do um, conversational practice, business English, and then one other one. And I think, I'm not sure what the other one was, but I think it was just like a chai night where they just do tea and everybody comes and hangs out, and it's just a great night practicing English. And so who knew English could be such a great opportunity to use to engage with people, to meet people. People are desperate to learn English because it opens up so many doors. And English is one of the hardest languages to learn, I'm convinced. I mean, there might be, like Mandarin may be harder, but English makes no sense. So when you see someone struggling to learn English, be compassionate. Because after I studied Turkish and tried to teach people English, English is terrible to learn. So just remember, be compassionate to people learning because it's really hard to learn English. And so we had a lot of outdoor events. So as you've seen the pictures that have us out at parks, this is what we do at least twice a month, once a month, depending on the weather during the winter seasons. As you can tell, this is probably during the spring, and it's quite chilly. As you saw, there was some snow, so the temps can get pretty cold there. But we'd go out and sit at these parks. We'd find different parks across the city where people could get there by public transportation, because there's no point picking a location nobody, like they have to drive to, because they don't have cars. Cars are very expensive there, so usually if someone has a car, you know, they probably have a little money. And so we would sit out at these parks and we'd have little picnics. Picnicking is huge there. They love gathering and having picnics. And so we would sit out there and we each would bring, the team would decide, okay, what are we going to bring? And then I was always amazed at the hospitality of Turks. They'd always show up to something. Their rule of thumb is never show up empty-handed. So they're going to show up with cucumbers or tomatoes, which that's a part of the kahvaltı, their breakfast picnics. And so they'd always show up with something, which I thought was sweet because we never asked them to. And we know that it's costly. I mean, the pandemic's happening, people weren't working, but yet here they are bringing something because that's a part of what you do. And so we would sit out at these picnic events from anywhere to 2 to 5 hours, depending on how cold it was and how long people wanted to be there. And we'd just talk. And it was really cool to just sit and have conversation and just see what happens. You never know what you're going to talk about. You never know where the conversation will go. But it was a really sweet opportunity of just getting to meet local people. People would just see us sitting and say, hey, what's going on? And they'd come over. Some of these were our neighbors, like these 2 girls right here. They were our neighbors. They lived in the apartment below us. And so we invited them and they came. And so it was just a really neat experience of seeing what the Lord can do just through basic conversations. One of the things that has stood out to me about our picnic events is that you just never know what the Lord's going to do. And so throughout our times, you know, we're constantly having conversation. We're constantly just building relationship with people. And through one of our events, we got to talking about birthdays. And so I was asking one of my friends, you know, well, when's your birthday? What do you do for your birthday? And he was like, you know, I've never had a birthday party. And he was probably about 27. And I thought, what? And so I think it was probably like 4 to 6 months later, my friends and I remembered, and I said, hey, we're going to throw him a birthday party at one of our picnic events. And so we had one of our picnic events, and we had this incredible opportunity to throw him a birthday party. And it was really sweet because all our different local friends came. And so here we are throwing this gentleman a birthday party, and he gave a speech afterwards. And it was, which no one asked him to give a speech, and so we're all kind of like, okay, and he asked us all to sit down, and so we're sitting out at this picnic table, we got blankets on the ground, and as he starts giving his speech, he just starts talking about the fact that he had never quite felt, it's okay.
Do you know if that's yours? Is that yours?
No, it's not mine. You can just minimize it. Okay. Or exit, or whatever makes your life happy.
There you go. Those are where that came from.
But yeah, one of the things, so in his speech, as he started talking, he just said, you know, spending time with you guys has really meant a lot to me. He said, I used to feel this way, but then as a result of spending life with you guys over the last year, now I feel this way. And it really was just this beautiful jaw-dropping moment where you're like, it's working. Like the Lord is using us to show himself, to reveal himself. And so whether my friend, like he doesn't know that that's who Jesus is. Like he doesn't know that that's Jesus. But the way he described how we have made him feel is exactly what Christ has done and the way Christ makes us feel. And so it was really encouraging just to know that through simple things like sitting at parks and having birthday parties for your friends, it really is communicating the love of Christ to them. It really is communicating their value and their worth. And that really was our main goal of doing these English events, is not to help them become proficient English speakers, although most of them were quite proficient in English. But our goal was just to help expose them to the way Christ loves and values them, to help to maybe have the opportunities just to share truth through what we were talking about. And I was convinced by the end of my time there and seeing all the events they'd come to and just the lengths they'd go to, I truly believe that they come because of the community that we provide them. They come because of the way Christ is working through us, that they're feeling a sense of welcomeness that they probably don't receive in other environments. And so that was very encouraging to me to know that the Lord can work through the smallest of things, like birthday parties, picnics, going on walks together. Some other things that we did as ministry there is we did a lot of prayer walking, whether that was as a group or individual or split up into groups. But as you could see from the city, this was our church. This is where we met outside in the garden. And eventually we did move inside by the end of my time there. But this is kind of what it looked like. So imagine sitting in these uncomfortable little chairs with no backs for 2 hours, 3 hours. Like, it was really incredible just to watch the lengths people will go to. But prayer walking was very important for me while I was there, because you don't want to just twiddle your thumbs. Sometimes when your friends are all busy, you feel bad just sitting around. And so the Lord really challenged me to get out and just pray for your city. Go to new neighborhoods, go to new areas, explore, figure out what needs might be in your city, and then pray for that. So that was really special for me to get a chance to do. One of the things that we focused on doing, at least me and my teammates, one of the things that they teach us at training before I went, was you want the idea of becoming a regular, the idea of being so consistent in a certain place that people start to recognize you, that they know you. You learn the names of the people that work there, and you can kind of build some relationship. And so me and my two teammates, my roommates, we had been there like pretty close together. Like they hadn't been there that much longer than I have. And so we had kind of just gone through training at the same time. And so that was one of our goals. We'd go into the local grocery stores and we'd ask people, what's your name? How are you today? Which is not culturally common at all, apparently, because they would always be shocked when we would ask them how they were. And usually they would just respond with thank you, because that was odd for them. But we made a point to ask people, what's your name? How are you? And so it was really cool that we did establish relationship with some people through that. We were able to hang out with some people as a result of doing that and just going to the same dessert shops. That was my favorite place to go to. There's a little dessert shop that had baklava and all these amazing things. I never knew what it was. And I would say that none of it was ever bad, and theirs was never bad, but their cookies, Turkish cookies, are not quite the same. Their concept of sugar, America just loves their sugar, so their concept of sugar is a little less, unless it's baklava, and it's really high. But I mean, it was just great. So I'd go into her shop at least once a week, once every 2 weeks, and I learned her name, got to learn about her family, and we still keep in touch. And it was really cool. I'd get a chance to sit in there with her, and we'd just drink chai and we'd talk. And so it was really cool to see, like, wow, just doing something as simple as going to the same place every day or every couple days or every week really can start to make a difference. And then one of the last things that really stood out to me about what ministry looks like there was the fact that invitations are huge. And that goes both ways. So I learned that, one, you need to invite people into your life. You need to invite people into your story and your journey. But then you also need to accept the invitations of others. And so when you're a foreigner living in a large land, you just got to start somewhere. And so working with my roommates we've kind of worked in tandem to say, okay, how can we make friends? Where do we make friends? What does that look like? And so we'd start going out to different events. We'd go to yoga in the park. We'd go to different coffee shops. We started building relationships with other people that were in our English classes, not English, our Turkish classes. We'd start trying to build a relationship with the people coming to our English events. We'd try to start building a relationship with our neighbors. And through that, you just start having invitations. And so sometimes that looks like, inviting people over to your house. I learned that people in Turkey are very big on relationship, and it takes them a while to warm up to you, but once you're in, like you're in. So if you can be consistent and faithful enough to build that, what's the rapport? Is that the word? Yeah. When you can do that to build the rapport, then you're in. And then you're not only in with them, but then you're in with the other neighbors, and you're in with the other people in the community. And so it was really cool to see that domino effect. And so that happened in our apartment, where we became friends with our building manager, and then we became friends with people over here, and then we became friends with people up here. And while they were all older than us, people who could be like our grandparents, they were really kind just to let us in and welcome us in and take good care of us. But we invited people to our house. We invited our friends over, and we introduced them. Take advantage of the things that are, specific to you. So we took advantage of the fact that we were Americans, and they think Americans were just fascinating. So we invited our friends over to build gingerbread houses at Christmas, although they're made out of like graham crackers, but close enough. We invited people over to make Christmas cookies. And then that gives you the opportunity to explain, what is Christmas really about? What does that really look like? It doesn't have to be complicated, but it's just saying, hey, let's use what we have and use that. We invited people over and cooked them tacos, because they've never had tacos. We cooked them pancakes. So it was really cool to be able to use things that seem so natural to us, but yet were very fascinating to them. We could use that as an excuse to invite them in, invite them over, and have them as our guests. I learned that giving my time could be the biggest thing. I mentioned that earlier, but Turkish people are big on spending lots of time together. So God really helped me to learn that if you're going to serve people, you just have to be available to them. And so I'm really grateful that through the program I went through, our main task was just to be present. Our main task was just to give the gospel where available and meet with people when possible. I wasn't out having to work an 8 to 5 job and then try to do life with people. My job was learn language, practice language, but then also just be available to make friends, meet people, go places. And so I learned that when you're meeting with people, be prepared to give them all of your time. I can think of multiple occasions where I'd go and meet a friend of mine for breakfast, which would probably be about 11 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock. And then you're going to spend the next 6 hours together probably. And that sounds exhausting to some of you, I'm sure, because that sounds exhausting to me now, but that's just the way it is. If you're going to have dinner guests over, expect them to be there until midnight or 1 o'clock, or at least before the transportation closes down, because they have to get back home. So I learned, don't double book. Don't make lots of plans, because it's going to overlap. And that was one thing that was fun talking with them about, is because they were always shocked when they would learn that it's a part of our culture to have cutoff times. Like, this is from 11 to 1, the end. For them, they're like, you don't do that. And so that was a cultural difference I had to adjust to, that they couldn't quite understand. Why would you put me on a time limit? Like, we're going to be together until we're done. And even when you're done, we'll probably still be together. And one of the times God really challenged me with that was one of my friends. She had come over, and she'd been there what felt like forever. And we'd been having good gospel conversation, but we just could tell like it just wasn't going anywhere. And she speaks English, so because when you speak in Turkish, that taxes you mentally. So you can only tolerate so much of trying to translate, because it's like doing math in your head all day. And if you're good at math, then you're probably good at learning language. But if you're bad at math, and I mean that just in the sense of doing mental work is taxing. When you're looking at it in your head and trying to remember the sentence structure and where does the verb go, and it was a lot. And so working in English was a lot easier, but she was there and we just kept going, and right about the time we kept giving like subtle hints like the time was over, she needed to go, and it wasn't working. And so finally I was like, okay, I'm just gonna say something. And right about the time I was gonna say something, she asked a great gospel question. And it was just like, the Lord gave us this beautiful opportunity. And of course I was like, Courtney, you're just gonna mess it all up. And so we got to have a good conversation with her about that. But I just learned that like the Lord's timing operates so much differently than ours. And it might take 10 hours, what feels like 10 hours, before you get to that point. But if you quit too soon, you're going to miss what might be a pivotal moment in their story. And so I learned that giving time was very crucial, and just being willing to be available to the Turkish people. They really valued that. They really valued that you were willing to just be there for them and be available to them. And so just a few prayer requests. I would encourage you guys to be praying for my teammates who are still there, but also workers who are still there, whether they're from our organization or whether they're from other organizations. But that you just be mindful that they are there and they are working, and that it is a very isolating experience. And the Lord is extremely faithful to sustain you, and He's very abundant to provide for you and prove Himself to be worthy. But yet it is tiring and it is taxing. So I just remind you to be praying for them, to be praying for the local churches and believers, because again, it's isolating, it's taxing, but yet God is doing a work. He is moving. I'd ask you to pray for some summer teams that are right there, who are there right now. There are 2 college teams that have come out to be with my team in Turkey for the summer. And so right now they're doing different events. They're having game nights. They're having English events. And so I just would ask that you be praying for them, that as they're building connection, and also as they're here for such a short time, they're able to come in and press a little harder and it not come across as offensive, because they're not trying to maintain relationships, so they can be a little more aggressive with giving the gospel. And so I'd be praying just for those opportunities. Be praying for the seeds that were planted while I was there, but yet also seeds that have been planted for years. While I was there, I had this incredible privilege of going to this local church, but I got a chance to be like on the chai team, so I was helping with tea. And as I got a chance just to be in the back and observe, I got a chance to talk with some of my other teammates who have been there for 15, 20 years within Turkey, which is an extremely long time to be planted in a foreign country giving the gospel. But as I was talking with them, they were saying, within this last few months, this has been one of the most fruitful, seasons we've had of just seeing people want to know more about the gospel, about people having questions, about people who believed in the gospel years ago but were never baptized, people who want to do discipleship. And so they were just really encouraged by that. And I thought, wow, they've been striving and planting seeds for 15 to 20 years, and yet they say this is one of the most fruitful seasons they've seen. And so just be praying for those seeds that have been planted, that the Lord will grow them in the time that He has designed. And then also just to give praise to God for how He has worked in Turkey, how He is working in there. So, I don't know, I probably went over my time, but if we have any questions, I'll give you time for questions unless Miss Esther cuts me off.
No, go ahead.
Yes.
May I speak on behalf of all of us and thank you for the excellence of your presentation. I'm just I had the privilege of teaching homiletics for a long time. I would give you an A+ for today.
Thank you.
I appreciate your intellect and your perceptiveness of your circumstance and the people there. Thank God for you and all those with you there who are serving so faithfully. Are you going back?
Great question. So that's the question everybody likes to start with. So my question is not no. I would like to go back. Do I feel called to be full-time? Not necessarily, but I really have a desire to be able to mobilize other workers to go. And not even full-time, but I think I've always was told growing up, you always need to go, you always need to go. And I just, but there is a beauty that comes from going that goes, wow, like when you go, you see what need there really is. Because people can tell you that there's a great need for the gospel, but until you see it for yourself and then realize the severity of it, but then also realize in your own context I couldn't help but think of people back in America and go, wow, like, you know, we're reaching people in America, but are we? Like, are we really trying? Because just living in Turkey, I saw how it's so much more than just inviting them to church, because that's not what you do there. You're not inviting them to church. You're not inviting them to events, church events. That's what we like to do in America. And sometimes it is effective, praise the Lord, like he does work through that. But there also comes a difference of inviting them into our life that says, hey, it's got to be life-on-life contact. And the Lord can work through anything, but I would really like to mobilize other people to go with the hopes that it mobilizes them to either be involved overseas or come home and realize the great need for the gospel in our own churches and our own communities.
You have an excellent spiritual gift, and God will show you where to use it.
Thank you. That's what I'm waiting on. So, and I say waiting. I'm just kind of chasing whatever comes, and so I'm really grateful. That was my first time really going overseas. I'd been to Burundi in Africa for 2 weeks, and then I ended up going on this trip for 17 months. And so I don't know what it will look like moving forward, but I don't know if that answers your question. Anybody else? Any other questions?
As a daddy, there's no boy good enough for you.
Now he's gonna have to be willing to travel.
But I hope you find a mate that's as enthusiastic as you are for the Lord.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank y'all for your time today. I appreciate y'all.
Thank you so much. I had her set up for July, but then we had, my speaker was supposed to come for today, couldn't.